We're recording live in Broadcast Alley in Moscone West, and I am Jeff Mann, co-host of Paul Security Weekly, and I'm here this morning to talk to Pranava Adduri. He is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bedrock Security. Pranava, welcome to the set. Welcome to RSA.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So, spent the better part of a decade doing data protection and data security. That journey started at Rubrik. I was there as one of the founding engineers, and Rubrik was in the data protection space. So originally, our goal was to build the enterprise time machine.
Okay.
We took something that was age-old, made it really cool and fun for people to use. And the idea was we were versioning workloads over time. Now, in 2018, ransomware made a resurgence, and this time came for good.
Right.
Or for bad, if you, depending on how you want to slice that.
Permanently.
And Rubrik made a bet that resilience would be a key part of that story. Because we were taking these workload backups anyway. If you got hit with ransomware, you could use Rubrik to get back up and running. And to really tell that narrative around ransomware, we also built a series of products to help detect ransomware and in progression. Because if you're taking these backups, you can see when they're getting encrypted, and in flight, you can call out, hey, you should be checking out these workloads.
Right.
So I led that team for that product line, and that was my transition to the data security side of the equation, combating ransomware. It was an amazing transition, really enjoyed jumping headfirst in, and I continued that journey at AWS as well. And AWS was interesting because with AWS Data Protection Services, a lot of the Fortune 500 were asking us about how do I defend against ransomware. Our answer was go back it up. And their response was, we have 50 petabytes of data.
Right.
Do you want us to back it all up? Right. So this idea of how do you layer your resilience around what matters most
Right.
was something that was taking root there, right? And if you think about the types of data that are worth protecting, there's regulated data, there's core IP, and then there's operational data. And for an enterprise, it's important to be able to understand where all of those sit across their many environments to be able to layer the appropriate protections.
Right.
And so that was where the seeds for Bedrock were formed. I got reconnected with the investor, one of the investors that I knew, and started incubating at Greylock, and we started the company in 2022.
You had nothing else to do. We were locked down.
Exactly.
Might as well build a company.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is Bedrock then offering to the community?
What we're really going after is there's a lot of data being generated right now.
Right.
And if there's one thing I can say about data, it is dynamic. It does not sit still. Dynamic data and static rules for detecting that data don't go well together. And so a lot of enterprises and teams that are trying to operationalize some of the legacy DLP tools, some of the legacy tools around managing access to data, they're playing a game of whack-a-mole.
Right.
They try to find sensitive data, something slips by, someone has to investigate it, they have to tune the rule, so on, rinse and repeat.
Yep.
And so the time to value for these types of tools is measured in 12 to 18 months in terms of getting them operationalized. And so when we set out to create Bedrock, our question was, how do we dramatically reduce that? And so I kind of alluded to this earlier, static rules don't work for dynamic data.
Right.
And securing data is actually a business problem, not purely a security problem. So you have to learn from the business what's most important if you want to have any shot at keeping up and reducing that effort down. So what Bedrock is doing, we introduced this concept called AI reasoning. You said the word AI.
You did it.
Add it to the tip jar. But the idea is this. If you hired me to do data security, and you said, Pranava, W-2s are restricted, W-4s are restricted, then I go off and start doing my job. If I see a 1099 form, even if I've never seen it before, based on the contents, I would reason that it's similar to the first two,
Right.
and therefore it's also restricted.
Right.
That's what we're doing at scale.
Gotcha.
Across Air, you can think about hiring Air as an employee that never sleeps, is learning your data 24/7, learning what's important to the business, and keeping up. And the shift that we're seeing for our customers is that the time to value is going from 12 to 18 months to people are getting up and running in a week. right? And it's really reducing that game of whack-a-mole, of understanding, constantly keeping up constantly tuning what's most important and iterating on these rules.
Right.
So that's what we set out to build at Bedrock.
It's an interesting concept. I began my career in information security at an organization whose title was information security for a certain three-letter agency back in the 80s. And we did data security. And back then it was mostly data in flight. And it was over radio waves and telephones and Morse code machines and things like that. But coming out into the private sector many years ago and trying to teach the world what I had learned about how to do data security, and collectively we've failed miserably because of forces at play that we won't get into, but just the concept of focusing on the data, which is now something I'm hearing more about in the last couple years. It's like, oh, they're finally getting the message. It's all about the data. You know, one of my favorite movies is Sneakers. Favorite hacker movies. It came out in 1992, and the most important line in that movie is where the bad guy and the good guy are talking, and the bad guy, Ben Kingsley, is saying, Marty, there's a world war out here, and it's not fought with bullets, it's fought with information. Everything you see and know and feel, it's all about the information. 1992, and we're just getting around to that, 40 years later, 30 years later, and trying to figure that out.
Absolutely.
I often talk about, the data back then. When I was a kid, we got this book delivered to our doorstep once a year that had name, address, phone number for everybody. That was not private information. But in the beginnings of the internet age, we started worrying about protecting the information, like you said, is on the 1099, the W2, W4, and back then, as we understood what the sensitive data was, at least the personal data, but now it's so much more. I'm glad that there's companies out there that are realizing that. I'm glad that there's a concept of you can't protect everything at the same level. Not that you want to throw away the data, but can you tell us a little bit, without revealing the secret sauce, how it works?
Yeah. So, and one thing I'll touch back to what you're saying is because it really is about focusing on what's important.
Right.
Because there's far too much data for any one team to be going out to look at and make sense of it all continuously and protect it.
Sure.
And so, in terms of prioritizing what's most important to the business, the peel back here is, in that example of a W2's, you tell me a W2 is restricted, you tell me a W4 is restricted,
right.
A 1099 should also be restricted based on its contents.
Right.
Maybe the peeling back layer there is, you have to have the ability to relate those two. And there's a couple of factors that enable this. One is, we have this whole AI revolution going on right now.
Yep.
One of the core enablers of that was embeddings and transformer architectures. The ability to vectorize content and relate them and put them close together.
Okay.
So that's one of the bits that helps us understand the similarity between data. Different types of data require different forms of similarity analysis.
Right.
If you have a document, you can use transformer models to say, well, this document is very similar to this other document. That's one example.
Okay.
But I also mentioned that it's not just about regulated data, it's about core IP, it's about operational data as well.
Right.
So you might have data that, like for example, one of the companies that we're working with, they deal with gene sequences. These gene sequences are 4 letters, copied and pasted and permuted across files that are gigabytes in size.
Right.
For them, the most important use case is to be able to put a boundary of trust around certain core patented gene sequences and ensure that they're only being used for authorized, sanctioned use cases, right? They don't want them copied into unsanctioned R&D and being used for being used to deliver products that are not within the legal scope of its usage.
Sure.
But how do you detect that? The nature of gene editing is you drop gene sequences, you compact them, you modify them. And the traditional way of doing this would be to take an exact file hash and say, okay, this hash is showing up here, therefore someone copied it. But that doesn't work. So again, the problem is about similarity. How do you detect that this is actually related to this? There, our coming from the world of backup really helps, because you can actually look at it as an overlap problem, right? How much are these two files overlapping? So depending on the type of workload, we have heuristics and technologies to relate the content together.
Right.
And based on that, we can also start inferring how important is this to the business.
So in an attempt to see if I'm understanding you, using the analogy of the W2 or the W4, let's say somebody changes their address on the form, but let's say it's not even the full street address in city and state, it's just they moved down the block or something like that. So everything's the same except for maybe the street number. That's what you're talking about, kind of, is being able to isolate that and change things without having to like copy the whole form over type of thing?
Well, it's about learning what makes the documents important. So if like, and I'll maybe put a little bit more context around that document example.
Sure.
Let's say really the policy that, Jeff, you want me to build is that restricted data cannot be emailed outside of our business.
Okay.
Right? And you tell me, for example, a W2 is restricted, a W4 is restricted, right? And if I try to email that out, some solution will block it. But in order for that to happen, it needs to be marked as restricted. So it needs to be known that that format is that particular.
Well, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine some search engines are just looking for the file name that has W2 or W4 in it, and not much more.
Yeah,
and you're looking inside and saying, smells like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
Right.
This is probably a W4.
Right.
It's more along those lines.
Exactly. And the forward thing that you just mentioned is metadata. Is a metadata approach to classification. It doesn't. It's very prone to false positives, right?
Sure.
Just as an example of a false positive that could come just by looking at the name is if you had a PDF named w2_instructions.pdf, that could also get flagged as restricted.
Right.
So you do need to look at the contents as well. You need to get the full picture, right? Because if someone flagged this to you, how would you figure out if it was a true positive or not? You would look at the contents, you'd look at the name, you'd look at the environment, you'd look at the sender. All of that would go into your final judgment call of whether it was sanctioned to be sent or not.
Right.
So it's.
So with what you're doing, you're successful at that. You're figuring out that, and you have your customers. I would guess at some point they got to say, this is what matters. This doesn't matter as much. This we don't really care about. You can sort of lead them to we've categorized or labeled everything, but they still have to know what to do with it. But then you can help them do that, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so. Coming back to what I said at the very at the start, the security team is typically administering these tools,
right?
But they don't have, like, the business is moving. The business is
They
always
don't have the business context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the most important thing to do here is not to overwhelm people, right? Because security teams, we have a chart that we show that data is growing exponentially, but security and GRC teams are growing linearly.
Right.
So the most important thing is to come back and say, look, these are the 5 most important things we found. Do you agree? And if not, you can actually tune the system with an English description, right? And the idea is to rapidly calibrate on what's important. And I like to joke that if anyone ever says that there's 0 false positives or negatives in the solution, you should run the other way, because that's just not possible.
Right.
But it's all about how
eliminate risk. It's not a thing.
There you go.
Hey, well, our time's gone fast. We are wrapping things up here. But appreciate you talking today and helping an old timer like me start to understand a little bit more about what's at play and what's involved in classifying data and capturing data and keeping companies afloat and in business. So thank you.
Absolutely.
If you want to find more information out about Bedrock Security, go to securityweekly.com/Bedrock RSAC. That's going to wrap for now. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot.